Hey everyone, Charles Wilson here from the DC Democratic Party. We're excited for another episode of Statehood Speaks, and I'm excited that our guest today is none other than the council member from the Great Ward 3, Matthew Frumin. Council member, how are you today?
Great. A little wet from the rainy ride in, but
Yeah,
otherwise great.
well, thanks so much for joining us. So we like to start our conversation off with all our guests asking the same question, and that is, what inspired you to become a Democrat?
Well, I come from a family of Democrats, but I think fundamentally, philosophically, there's a statue outside of the Federal Trade Commission that's got this giant horse and this guy who's holding on to the horse. And the idea is that the Federal Trade Commission is harnessing the power of the free market, avoiding its excesses, and also facilitating its ability to succeed. Fundamentally, I guess I think that government plays a critical role in doing that. I think the horse is critically important, that free market folks want to try to do things to advance themselves, all 110% for it. But we need a governmental structure that protects us against the excesses and also creates a fair set of rules in which everybody can benefit. And that at heart is what makes me a Democrat. Similarly, I hearken back to when I was in high school, my dad took me to a diner outside of Detroit. I grew up outside of Detroit.
Mhm.
And then on the way back, we pulled over to the side of the road, and I was a little puzzled, like, what's my dad doing? And he pointed to an overpass by the Rouge plant, and he said, "That's where the Ruther brothers fought off the Pinkertons and built the American middle class." So that's a seminal battle, the Battle of the Overpass,
Mhm.
in the creation of the UAW. And I believe in that also, in that sense of joint action. Then I guess increasingly, I think we're in a place where we have those who believe in multiculturalism and others who have a different kind of view of what America should be. And I decisively fall into the beauty of the quilt. And so that's another thing that makes me a Democrat.
I love it. So, like on that note, for our listeners who want to kind of get to know you a little bit better, tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming the council member of Ward.
Yeah, so I mean, my journey into public service started when I was a kid. My mother was very active on lots of things. If you see the things that I work on, my mother was very active on education issues and
Okay,
arts.
where it comes from.
And one of the things that she used to do is she would enlist me or draft me into her different campaigns, millage elections, and things like that. And I would work the polls on election day. Even as a very little kid,
Yeah.
fourth grade, got the day off school and stood out in front of the polls on cold Michigan mornings. She then, when I came home, she would make me steak and French fries while we watched the returns.
Mhm.
So you're trying to sink the hook on public service. That's a pretty good way to sink the hook on public service. Over the years, I was very active nationally and on international stuff. And at some point, somebody came to me and said there was an opening on the ANC and maybe I would be interested. And also, there was going to be a process to modernize what was then called Wilson High and now is Jackson Reed. Might I be interested in getting involved? And so I thought, okay, let's give it a try. And the local work, the hook just got deeply, deeply sunk. I felt like I can make a difference here. And while I'm interested in all of these things on the national and international level, it's so tangible and the ability to make a real difference in people's lives. And then also, because of the work I did on education, it got me out of my bubble and into the city more generally. And when I ran at large, that even more so. And I fell in love with the city and all of its different communities. So when the opportunity came to run, I jumped at it uh, and thought this would be the way to make a bigger difference than the difference that I had previously been able to make. And so I threw myself into it. So that's sort of my path. It was not a local path to start, and now it's become almost exclusively.
So, Ward 3 residents were known to be like super active, super engaged. Since you've become a council member for Ward 3, what is the top level concerns that have been brought to your attention?
Yeah, well, I mean, education is a big one and very, very important to Ward 3 families. And frankly, many families move to Ward 3 because of their confidence in the education system and often stretch financially in order to be able to do that. So that's a thing that is very important to folks. You know, crime everywhere is a challenge and is on people's minds. Things have gotten better, but um, but still there's a long way to go. So that's one of the challenges that is out there. And then sort of, there's a million different issues, but one of the things that I hear about a decent amount is all the demand for youth sports and yet the shortage of field space and things like that. That's not just a Ward 3 thing. Um, but that's another kind of element. I should add, I mean, I feel like we're doing pretty well in our senior services world, but it goes back and forth between Ward 3 and Ward 4, which ward has the most seniors, but we have a lot of seniors. And so making sure that we have thick, inviting senior services, another issue that I hear about. And then I guess lastly, but very, very importantly, is the effort to make Ward 3 more affordable in the ward, which is a challenge to do, but a very important project that's very high on my list.
Yeah, you said a couple things that rings true to my heart. One, I have a 9-year-old who's very involved in sports, and there's always a struggle to find uh, field space uh, for the sports he and his friends participate in. And we're always trying to find the best level of education we can for him. It's a struggle sometimes trying to find, do we travel across the city to get into the best school, or do we find another alternative? Everything you said is 100% true.
Yeah, and I mean, the challenge that you face, I mean, a thing that has animated me from the beginning of my local activism is that we need to get to a place where everyone feels like there's a great school in their neighborhood and they don't have to travel to get there. That's an equity issue, but it's frankly also an economic development issue. One of the things that we see is a lot of young families leave as their children approach middle school. And if we want to grow as a city, we need to keep our families. It also kind of goes to what sort of city do we want to be? I don't know, where are you from originally, Charles?
So my dad was in the military, so we traveled a great deal. So I used to live overseas.
But I mean, you know lots of people whose families have been here for generations. And not everybody should stay in the same place. People should choose different lives. But having a place that is got that kind of community from people who a great aunt who you bump into on the street, there's a magic to that. And we need to keep our families if we're going to have that. We've had that in the past,
Hmm.
but we don't have it right now.
Yeah, and I've had a lot of neighbors who moved to the neighborhood, got married, started a family, and when their kids were school age, a lot of them moved to a more affluent part of the city, and then they eventually moved out of the city. So everything you're saying is definitely a priority to a lot of families here. How do you see Ward 3 contributing to the broader success of the district?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things is in advocacy. On schools issues in Ward 3, we have a very, active advocacy community. It, it used to be the case that every ward in the city had an education council, but Ward 3. In Ward 3, there were a whole bunch of very strong PTAs and LSATs, but there wasn't one organization that pulled it all together. And I had at some point been a leader in creating the C for DC, the Coalition for DC Public Schools and Communities. Then moved to try to create a Ward 3 or to help facilitate the creation of a Ward 3 education network that could be part of citywide advocacy. And so Marshall, the advocacy from Ward 3 in support of citywide issues is a thing that happens a lot. And I think that's an important way that the ward contributes, whether it's in the education space, The other day I was at Sycamore and Oak for something on housing, and there were a number of Ward 3 advocates who were part of the organizing committee. So being at the table and bringing the resources that Ward 3 can bring to advocacy, I think is a pretty important thing. One of the things Derek Musgrove often talks in Chocolate City, they talk about the story of the metro. And what you saw then was a coalition of folks from Ward 3, folks from around the city, who fought off those highways. Now, we got 295, and it's a shame, but we didn't get a whole bunch of other ones. And the Ward 3 advocates were part of the mix in getting to a better result that included the metro instead of highways crisscrossing the city. So it's that sort of thing.
Earlier in the conversation, you talked about affordable housing and how it's an issue still citywide, but it's a struggle sometimes building affordable housing in Ward 3. For folks who are listening and don't understand why, can you explain why it's a struggle?
Yeah, so there's two things in Ward 3. One is land cost. And so in order to build affordable housing, you got to make the numbers work. And if land cost is very, very high, then it's very difficult to make the numbers work without very, very large subsidies. So that's one of the things. And a way around that is use of public land or public air rights. Another way around it is projects by mission-driven entities. I had chaired the board for the Lisner Home, and we built the first Housing Production Trust Fund project. The ribbon cutting will be this summer in Ward 3 ever, 93 units of deeply affordable senior housing. But that's a mission-driven organization, so they didn't maximize every dollar that they could have gotten out of that land. So those are challenges. And then also some of what makes Ward 3 great, which is the tenacious advocacy for individual communities. Sometimes you have folks who are very concerned about significant changes to their community. Now, that isn't about, sometimes those folks are accused of wanting to welcome different kinds of people. I don't think it's that. Honestly, I think there are a fair number of folks who don't care about the color of the skin of the person who parks their car in front of their house. They don't want somebody to park their car in front of their house. And so they're concerned about increased density and what that will mean to the feeling of their community because of the number of people, not because of the kinds of people. That's what I believe. But change is actually, nothing stays the same. And every part of the city has an obligation to help address critical needs. And so we need to overcome those things, not to build skyscrapers, not to build any old thing, but to take appropriate action to support adding affordable housing throughout.
Our podcast is called Statehood Speaks, and we cannot have a podcast entitled that and not ask a question about DC State. I know you're a big supporter of statehood, but how do you think this conversation is going to evolve over the coming years, especially with this current Republican administration?
Yeah, so I think there has, over the years, been an effort to say statehood is not a partisan issue, that statehood is right. And everybody of every political stripe should come to embrace the rightness of our cause. I think that's true. Everybody should embrace the rightness of our cause, but statehood has become an entirely partisan issue. And so we need to get to where we take the House, take the Senate, and have the presidency, and are in a position to pursue statehood, and are in a position to say to Democrats from around the country, you would be out of your mind to support statehood. Where we've been is Bill Clinton had the opportunity with 60 votes in the Senate and control of the House and the presidency to do it. And he didn't pursue it because he thought, if I do that, the Republicans will never work. And the Republicans never work. And so then Barack Obama had the same thing. And he said, if I do that, they'll never work with me. And they really did.
Never worked.
there is a fool me once, fool me twice. I'll forgive the second time that
Yeah.
we made this mistake. But if we get to a place where we control the House, Senate, and presidency, it would be political malpractice
Yeah.
not to go for state. For now, we can't do it. It's not,
Right.
it's not going to happen. But when the day comes where the stars align, everything that's happening now only makes our argument of rightness more powerful, but also only makes our argument of politically more powerful. And I guess one last thing is, frankly, achieving statehood is constitutional, but it also would help address an inequity that was built into the Constitution, which is overrepresentation of some parts of the country and underrepresentation of denser, more populous parts of the country. And we have a systematic disenfranchisement of a whole category of folks from densely populated places. And adding the district as a state helps to remedy that. And we should do it because it's right in that way also.
The DC Dems, we're actually going to host a conversation pretty soon on a topic that is you hear a lot about it locally and nationally. And the question is, what does it mean to be progressive? And so I can't wait for the conversation. But what are your thoughts on what that means to you? Or what do you think it means to people in the city?
I mean, progressive to me has an early 20th century meaning, which is to lift up folks who the free market would not lift up on their own, and to regulate the market in a way that protects folks from what can be the rapaciousness of the market. And so that's sort of how I learned about what progressivism is. And it goes back to why I'm a Democrat, because I believe we all do better if we have a very large, very wide middle class, and everybody benefits from that. And so achieving that is what I think of as progressive. There's a whole lot of other late 20th century, early 21st century, there's a whole nother gloss of social issues that some would say that's what defines progressivism. And then also, I suppose, environmentalism. I think environmentalism is another one of those things that fits into making sure the market works for everybody and not against many of us. I'm sympathetic to many of the social issues, but when I think about progressivism or my brand of progressivism, it's much more make sure everybody has an opportunity.
We're going to edit this podcast on the back end before it's published. And there was a question that just popped into my head that I did not send over. So I'm going to ask it. If you don't want to answer it, I completely understand. And we'll edit it out. But what are your thoughts on the Commanders coming back to the district and building a new stadium?
So to me, it's a question of whether it's a good deal for the district. There are different people have talked about the fact that the district owns different land, and it has taken a very long time to activate that land. Hill East has been in play for 20 years. And that's one set of issues. That's because of one set of things. McMillan Reservoir took an awful long time. But the fact that we have the land doesn't mean it will change. And so the fact that the commanders would put 2.7 billion and the district would put money in order to get it going, I think is meaningful. It isn't so much comparing a football stadium and housing and mixed use compared to, but if we didn't do that, we'd just do housing and mixed use. It might take a very long time before we did housing and mixed use without the catalyst of the investment in the stadium. So I'm sympathetic to the idea of doing it. I also think I hear the arguments that it's only used for a certain number of games, but it would be used for some other things. And it would put us on the map for things like big concerts, things like the World Cup. So I'm not averse in principle, but I do want to make sure I don't want it. So I want to make sure that we get a good deal. I want to make sure that are using the land appropriately. One of the things I look at is these big parking garages.
Yeah.
We need to have a certain amount of parking. I groan when I see those. I haven't heard any conversation about what are we doing greens that I expect to be digging in on. Certainly open in principle if I can be persuaded that we're doing it on terms that are good.
You're good. So one last question. You've been serving in this role for a couple of years now. What is the one thing that has surprised you about the district since being elected council member for Ward 3?
So, because you've seen me around for years, that I've seen a lot of the district and been engaged in a lot of different places around the district because I fell in love with it and, found it so interesting and gratifying in lots of different ways. I guess there's two things that were something of surprises for me. One of them, when I ran, I did not ever think about what it would be like to be a councilman. Never thought about it. And you could think he's not the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, I just didn't. I thought, okay, this is the next step in the way that I can make a difference, but I didn't think what would it be like. In an early day, maybe even before I got on the council, in the weeks before I came into the Wilson building, and a security guard said, "Good morning, council member," and I was like, "Whoa!" I didn't. And there's 13 of us and a mayor and an attorney general. And so we're public figures in a way that I had not thought about was going to be the case. Not the sharpest tool in the shed, but that's the reality of it. And I love it, but was surprised by it. So that's one thing. The other thing is in November, before I came on the council, I met with Chairman Mendelson and talked with him about committees I was interested in. And I'd been a lawyer for 35. And I said that to him. I said, I've been a lawyer for 35 years. I could chair a committee. If
Yeah.
you're having trouble doing all the assignments, I have a lot of life experience. And he politely demurred. I don't know whether he said no or. And then once I got on, uh, maybe 6 months in, I thought, no, he is totally. I could not. Maybe I could have, but I would have spent so much time trying to get a committee up and running and dealing with the committee and not been able to learn nearly as much about if I had to start with a committee. And so I had underestimated work there would be. I'm not complaining. I love every minute of it, but it is a lot. And if you're trying to do it responsibly and know what you think about all the many, many things that come in front of you, it's an awful lot of work. And again, should not have surprised me, but had not fully anticipated.
Got it. That's very insightful. So, Councilmember Frumin, thank you so much for joining us today on Statehood Speaks. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I know once we publish this, the public is going to really enjoy it also. Is there any final thoughts you want to share with the public before we close?
Yeah, I guess this is an incredibly challenging time for the District of Columbia. Sometimes I think okay, I feel very, very fortunate to have a seat at the table while we're trying to navigate this. But I also sometimes think it might have been fun to be a council member when we had so much money we didn't know what to do with. But that's not where we are. I do think so far we have pulled together in response to the circumstances we face really well. I think that's true between the mayor and the council and the attorney general, and I think it's great. I think it's true among our various stakeholders. The activations that happen to try to resist the continuing resolution, we still have to get that over the finish line. But the activations were impressive, and the way in which people did it was impressive. And then the activations to avert a change to our Medicaid reimbursement rate, which for now, okay, we're going to have a whole lot of problems from this budget, but that rifle shot to our heart, which that's what it would have been. I think we've avoided it, and we avoided it by everybody. I think we're in a period that is really challenging, calls for a lot of discipline. And one of the ways in which I talk about it is when I was growing up, there was the anti-war movement and there was the civil rights movement. In the anti-war movement, The civil rights movement was incredibly disciplined, and they knew who their audience was for everything that they did. And we got the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, and we made real progress. All of it's under siege today, but we made real progress because of the way in which they approached it. The anti-war movement didn't have the same kind of discipline and may have contributed to us getting Richard Nixon. And so I think we've done great so far, but I think as we navigate this period, we really want to emulate this is our civil rights movement. Stick together and get the district through this.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much for joining us. You're always welcome back. And just put a pencil in on your calendar. We're going to have the Kennedy's King dinner again later this fall. So we hope you'll be there and help us raise some money too.
All right. Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot, Charles. Always great to see you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Bye bye.